we have Ken Burns here to talk about his Peabody Award-winning program, Central Park 5, and he has several of the subjects of the film. So Ken, would you like to be the first one to tell the story?
Good evening. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Pat. Let me reiterate our thanks to the Peabody Awards. It is the most special award in television. Everyone knows it, and unlike the Oscars, which seem to be a kind of popularity contest and a competition, we understand that when we have been given this rigorously earned imprimatur in the form of this statue, it means something, not only to us, but to our colleagues. And so I would just extend just a heartfelt congratulations to all the other winners. On behalf, this is a film I made with my daughter Sarah, who, as you heard today, just had my first grandson 2 weeks ago. And by her husband, my son-in-law, David McMahon, who spoke this afternoon and who is going back to help with Finn Alexander McMahon, but barely 2 weeks old. And Grandpa is left with the pleasurable task of being here with you and needing also to thank PBS and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Atlantic Philanthropies and members of the Better Angels that supported this film and made it possible. And of course, PBS, which has been my sole home for almost 40 years of filmmaking, and so grateful to do that, and also to say something about the Paley Center, which has been for us a huge and extraordinary resource. So it's nice to sort of cap the day off here. This project was born in my own daughter's interest in perhaps one of the most extraordinary cases in the history of New York City. On April 19th, 1989, that's 25 years and 1 month ago, a woman was brutally raped in upper reaches of Central Park. It was presumed that she would die. There had been a kind of a roving band of boys that had been making mischief that night, and then a few other more serious crimes. And many of them were sort of rounded up, or anyone was rounded up, and subjected, often without parents, without food, without water, to upwards of 30 hours of interrogation by the homicide detectives that were assumed to be taking care of a case that was soon to be a homicide. They were subjected to every technique, and in the case of the Central Park 5, the 5 young men who were eventually charged and convicted and served out their full sentences for the crime, they had not been in trouble before and didn't know the tricks of the mischief makers to sort of say, I have Miranda rights, I'd like to see my parents, I'd like to see a lawyer. They got conned into agreeing. They were told they could go home if they just said that someone else had done it. And when they said that, it was like a circular firing squad, and they ended up suddenly thrust into this thing. If you were a member of the Central Park 5 in 1989, you were the worst people in the world. We heard about this brutal rape. We then assumed, because the cops said that they had confessions, that they were guilty, and we began to wring our hands. What's happened to our cities? Any of you who are alive in New York, I was working in New York editing the Civil War film. I bought into it. Everyone bought into it. And no one asked a very simple question: who were those 5? Now, I'm sorry to say that Corey Wise and Antron McCrae are not here, but I'm happy to introduce to you again 3 extraordinary human beings who in 1989 were considered the worst people in the world, and no one asked a single question about who they were, where they came from, the backgrounds, the strong family backgrounds that they all came from, not been in trouble before, and all of a sudden found themselves in the midst of the worst possible nightmare. Corey served almost 13 years in jail. They served almost 7 years in jail. Once they were out, they were registered sex offenders. They could have taken a plea deal when the trial was going on. There was no DNA evidence. There's no circumstantial evidence whatsoever to link them to the crime. It was a horribly bloody crime scene, and nothing of the crime scene was on them, and none of them was on the crime scene. There was a mysterious DNA that they just dismissed. None of their coerced confessions, recognized the existence of this mystery person, but that didn't bother anyone. Not the cops, not the prosecutors, and certainly not the media that went along with this, which complicit, nor the rest of us. They went through this. They were offered a plea deal. They turned it down because they didn't do it. They had opportunities for parole. They would always be denied parole because they wouldn't first admit their crime. They came out, they were registered sex offenders. But just before Corey was released, after 13 years, the real rapist, who they could have caught any time that summer and connected the dots with missing DNA, confessed that Corey was doing time for a crime he'd committed. They took his DNA. It matched the DNA sample from 13 years before. They quickly moved to vacate the convictions. But since that time, in December of 2002, you can do your math, nothing has happened. The city has not settled, even though this mayor has promised to settle this case. It is still 25 years afterwards, still unsettled.